Yes, sir. That person may safely venture on its way who is so guided that it cannot stray. Greeting of the day to all of you. We all know that the entire world is witnessing an upheaval in all facets of life, be it business, technology, social relations, or education. But one thing that remains untouched and unchanged is the importance of mentors in our life. JC Bose University of Science and Technology, YMCA Faridabad, under the aegis of Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Dinesh Kumar, has always pioneered to bring forth the program to help us excel in our research work. In the same series is our today's webinar titled Developing as a Doctoral Student or Postdoc by Seeking Mentorship in Our Changing Educational Landscape, to be delivered by Dr. Victor R. Prybutok. This program is being conducted by Research and Development Cell and International Affairs Cell of JC Bose University of Science and Technology, YMCA Faridabad. I, Dr. Shalja Jain, on behalf of JC Bose University, extend a very warm welcome to all of you in this unique session. I request all the participants to please keep their microphone mute and video off. They are also requested to please ask questions through chat box only. All the questions will be taken at the end of session. Now, I would request to Dr. Rajesh Kumar Ahuja, Dean Research and Development, JC Bose University of Science and Technology, to share with us brief introduction of today's webinar. Over to you, Dr. Ahuja, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shalja. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Honorable VC Sir, Professor Dinesh Kumar ji, invited speaker, Dr. Victor R. Prybutok, colleagues and parents. A very good evening to all and a very good morning to Dr. Victor. R&D section of the university always strive for active participation and involvement of its researchers in research-related activities. To keep our researchers motivated and active, R&D section has started webinar series on various research-related as well as motivational lectures to be conducted on fortnightly basis. This is our first lecture in this series, which is being conducted in association with International Affairs Cell of the University. We are delighted to have Dr. Victor R. Prybutok, Vice Provost for Graduate Education and Dean of the Toulouse Graduate School at the University of North Texas with us today to deliver lecture on developing as a doctoral student or postdoc by seeking mentorship in our changing educational landscape. Hope all participants will have an informative session to help them in future endeavors. Thanks to all. And once again, welcome to Dr. Victor. Over to Dr. Shalja.
Thank you, sir, for crisp introduction of the program. We are honored to have with us Professor Dinesh Kumar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, JC Bose University of Science and Technology, YMCA Faridabad, who is constant source of inspiration for us. Professor Dinesh Kumar has obtained PhD degree from Cambridge University and has published over 100 research papers. He is the recipient of Homi J. Baba Gold Medal, which was given by our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji. He has also been awarded with the title of Rank Bandhu Shiksha Shiromani Samman by Rank Bandhu Sahitya Academy and is also awarded with the title of Most Eminent Vice Chancellor by All India Council of Human Resources. Under his leadership, the university has reached new heights like A-grade accreditation by NAC and NPA accreditation of its various courses and made presence in NIRF ranking every year. Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, we would certainly like to hear a few words from you to fuel up our motivation. VC, sir, please.
Okay, so I'm audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So thank you very much, Dr. Shalja. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajesh. And in fact, I would like to welcome Dr. Victor on this occasion to our university in an online way, online mode. I know nowadays everything is moving, everything is being arranged online. And we are very happy that Dr. Victor agreed to be with us this evening. Yeah, this morning for Dr. Victor, as in US it is morning. But the title of his talk is also something very important, especially looking at the scenario world over, when you know, PhD student and postdoctoral fellows are passing through a different kind of stage altogether, because most of the universities are not letting student you know, to go and to join for PhD program. And I know, especially in India, uh, thousands of PhD students and postdoctoral fellows have been locked down, and they are only, you know, at home and not able to do anything. I think his views in this time, in this scenario, will be definitely something very motivating for these young persons. And I know the strength of any university lies basically in the research. It is not only teaching, but research is also a very important component. And if we are able to attract good PhD student and good postdoctoral fellows, I think this increases strength of any university and rating of any university. And we are very happy that Dr. Victor, I don't know whether he has been to India before or to, I know he has never been to our university perhaps, but yes, it will be really nice that once this COVID-19 situation is over, if he visits our university, whose university name has been kept, you know, recently it has been changed after a great scientist, Indian scientist, J.C. Bose. I'm sure Dr. Victor might have heard about J.C. Bose. He contributed, you know, he did a lot of research in different areas, and one important area was this wireless communication. And he used to be, people consider that his ideas were actually, you know, responsible for all kind of things what is happening nowadays. We are using this Wi-Fi and things like that. So I'm very happy that Dr. Victor is here, and he'll be motivating some of our young students and faculty members. And I welcome Dr. Victor again, and would like to request him that whenever situation improves, we will meet physically, and we will also try to, you know, increase our collaborative research, and maybe something good emerges out of this kind of interaction. So thank you, Dr. Victor, again for being with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your inspiring words as always. Now, I take this opportunity to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Victor R. Prybutok. Dr. Prybutok is Regents Professor of Decision Sciences in Information Technology and Decision Sciences Department, Vice Provost for Graduate Education and Dean of Toulouse Graduate School at University of North Texas. He completed his MS in Environmental Health and Environmental Analysis and Applied Statistics in 1984. Dr. Prybutok is a recipient of American Society for Quality Philadelphia Section's Edwin S. Hoffer Award in 1991 in recognition of outstanding services in stimulating the application of statistical quality control procedures by industry in Delaware Valley. In 2017, he received the American Society for Quality Graded Award for co-authoring the paper Sequencer, a social networking site quality model published in 2016 in Quality Management Journal. In 2018, he was awarded 2018 Decision Sciences Institute Lifetime Distinguished Educator Award. Now, without much ado, I hand over the mic to Dr. Prybutok to conduct the session, please. Dr. Prybutok.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And it's good to at least hear all of you again. Some of you were probably at the conference in December that I attended and in Delhi. And when I was there, I had the opportunity to present at your university. And some of what I have today is related to that, but at the same time, I'm using it in a different way. And I'm also going to cover the mentorship part that I think is so important right now. So again, it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you and to talk about developing yourself in terms of being a scholar. Seeking mentorship is quite critical given our landscape right now. And by landscape, I mean that most of us are working from home. We're dealing with COVID. For example, last year I was able in December to go to India. This year I'm sitting in a family room in my house, working remotely via Zoom. And thank goodness that we have the technology we do. So I want to thank everyone again, and I want to move on with the presentation. First of all, I'd like to tell you, for those of you who don't know, a little bit about the So, okay, so everyone can hear me now? I want to talk a little bit about the University of North Texas. Just so you're familiar with the school. We are 39,000 students. We have about 7,000 graduate students. In that group, we have 4,372 master's students and 1,891 doctoral students. We have about 130 graduate programs. We have 11 different colleges at the university. So the talk today is really about what is mentorship? How do you find a good mentor? I know that it's more difficult now than possibly ever because in a traditional campus environment, you can meet people, you get to sit around with them, you get a better sense. And now it becomes more complicated to reach out. You almost have to reach out individually to connect to people. And so I want you to understand that having that mentor is critical to becoming a successful graduate and to engaging in your research, teaching, and service component, those things that will make you successful as either a doctoral student or as a faculty member or in industry, should you go to industry. These are critical in all areas. So the first thing I tell everyone is that they should seek a mentor early. And this is really true for doctoral students as soon as they walk into the program. But it's also true for postdoctoral students because you're entering a different phase of your educational component. And you really only have a few years in which to learn to be more productive than you were even in your doctoral program. Typically, people do postdoctoral work in order to improve their publication skills, their research skills, and ready themselves for a better faculty position or research position than they might garner directly from the doctorate itself. So a good mentor helps you progress in terms of understanding what your role is, how to fulfill it, how to seek grants, how to obtain publications, how to gain a tenure track position or an industry position. Many of you, if you look at my background, you might think that I've been an academic, and I really have for a very long time. But I did spend a few years in industry after I had my doctorate. And those few years were at a research institute at a major corporation, the Campbell Soup Company. And in that research institute, there were over 100 people who had doctorates that worked there. So industry does employ in almost every company, lots of scientists, and those people need to do basic research related to product development and other things that make the company successful. So I talk about becoming a successful graduate because seeking a mentor is critical to doing all of these things. How do you know how to become a faculty member? How do you know how to teach a class? How do you know how to learn how to conduct research, engage in service? This is critical whether you want to be a research scientist and I use scientists in the broadest sense of the word. It includes engineers, it includes humanities. We're all developing new knowledge. And that is the sense in which I'm using the term scientist. So don't feel I'm talking only to people who major in science, but I'm rather talking to all of you as future scientists, developers of new knowledge, and contributing to our society through that. So the first thing is, how do you actually learn to conduct research? You typically take some classes in a master's program. Some doctoral programs have a core set of courses, and those courses lay a foundation, but they don't really teach you the mechanics of conducting research. And so a mentor has a great deal of input into guiding you through that process. And I'm going to talk a little more about it as we continue, but I want you to understand that it's more than just research. For doctoral students, hopefully they get to be a teaching assistant. Maybe they have their own section, become what we call a teaching fellow, but a class they're responsible for where they deliver some lectures. How do you determine if you're a good teacher? How do you actually evaluate your teaching? Most universities today have evaluations at the end of the term, but that's really not sufficient. You really need to gain ongoing feedback as you teach a course. And the reason for that is you want to have touch points with the students so you understand what they're learning, what they're not understanding, some feedback about the course so that you can address those concerns. You can think you can ask questions in class and students will respond, but they really don't. And so, or some do, of course. There are those who will speak out, but there's many who will sit silently. So you have to develop mechanisms, and these have existed for many years, all the way back to a famous statistician who developed this, Mosteller, or actually he started using it and popularized it in statistics. Other people had developed it. But that said, handing out 3x5 cards in the classroom. And I did this 25 or 30 years ago before we did electronic surveys. And I asked students to write down their questions. And I would do this every 3 weeks or so. And I would ask them to write down anything they didn't understand in class. And I would go through those 3x5 cards and look for common themes. And then I would go back and say, well, you know, several of you were wondering about, like when you teach basic statistics, what a p-value is and how to actually calculate it. Now, it's true that I had covered it in class, but I also know that it's a difficult concept. I actually could tell you that most students will ask about that later. But that said, it's nice that I've heard from them and I'm responding to them. It engages them. So why am I giving you this story? Because I teach this to my students. And what I have them do today is I have them in around week 3, give a little short online survey, because now we can do it electronically, to their students. And that way they hear from their class, they have a chance to respond, and they improve the students' reception to their teaching. The reason I'm talking about teaching is I'm trying to show you the kinds of things you can engage in as a mentor. What about service? Most students don't exactly engage in service, nor should they engage in a lot of it. Occasionally, they may be on a grad student council or have some duty, but the reality is it's important to show doctoral students and postdoctoral students what service is. And the reason for that is that when they become a faculty member sometime in the future, they actually need to maintain their productivity, despite the fact that their productivity in terms of their research and their contribution to moving science forward, despite the fact that they're teaching multiple courses and engaging in service to the university by developing new courses, advising students, curriculum development for programs. And all of this is important, not just to becoming future faculty, but it's also important to becoming a research scientist in industry. Because even though the job is slightly different, as a research scientist, someone who holds a doctorate, you typically have to not only engage in your own research, you have to do presentations at the corporate level, and you're asked to assist others in the organization with other tasks. And you need to understand how to balance all of these things, as well as any faculty member. All right, so this is me at the Decision Sciences Institute when I received the award for lifetime teaching. And this is really a large number of my doctoral students. I've got over 50 actually, doctoral students who I've chaired to completion over a variety of different skill sets. And I've chaired all of them and successfully placed them as faculty. And so it's not by chance that that happens. It happens because I'm very purposeful about how I prepare them to enter the job market. My wife is also next to me. My daughter is in front of us, but my wife has a few doctoral students as well. And some of you may remember she was with me in India. She also presented because we focused a lot of the talk on healthcare, and she is an expert in healthcare. She's in the College of Health and Public Service, and her doctoral students are working in the area of health and gerontology and public health. So I want you to understand that I've been doing this for a lot of years. I've changed what I've done over the decades because the market is becoming increasingly competitive over the decades. The very thing that got me a job over 35 years ago would not get a job for my students today. And so the reason for that is at one time it was sufficient to finish your degree. Now to place my students in the fall of their last year, I have some students who finish in 3, some in 4, occasionally 5. But the average time to degree for my students is 4 years. In order to place successfully for the following fall, they need to have multiple journal articles in the fall in which they're interviewing. They need to have a dissertation proposal that they've defended. They have to have the data or the simulation running or the mathematical model resolved so that they can tell people when they interview that they are working on the final write-up, results, and conclusions of the dissertation. The reason that this is so important, and for those of you who don't get this, I want to be clear, is that they're interviewing in a market where schools look at 20 students with screening interviews. After they look at 20 at the conference, they will then invite 2 or 3 to campus to screen them for faculty position that they're hiring for. In order to be competitive, you need to make sure the school understands that you will actually have your degree in hand by the following fall. Now for my US students, they could finish in May, but my international students, the timing is critical that they complete by August so that they go right from a student visa to OPT or an H-1B at their new university without a break. All right, so I pay attention to the immigration issue. I pay attention to the research status, progress that they have to have in order to place. I pay attention to their teaching. We work at their teaching when they start teaching, typically their own sections. We look at their teaching evals. We talk about how to improve them. And of course, I talked about how I teach them to monitor the class while they're teaching. But I also teach them after the class is over to review the student feedback and prepare for the next class so that their evals go higher. So ultimately, my students interview, they understand what service means as a faculty member. They have good teaching evals. They have publications. They have a proposal that's completed. And they are working on the results and conclusions of their data. And that's in the fall before the year they're hired. So they're actually interviewing with the school understanding that this is a person who's going to walk in the door as a faculty member and be able to be productive immediately. Now, I'm emphasizing that because it is your job as a student to do all those things, but you have to work with a mentor that's willing to assist you. So not every mentor does all those things, and it doesn't mean that everyone has to do all of them, but you may have to seek out more than one person. So for example, I am extremely good at most of this, but my wife is actually better than I am at the interview process, because before she got her PhD, she spent 30 some years as a healthcare executive, and she used to be the chief nursing officer at a hospital. She interviewed hundreds of people over the years. And so she's very familiar with the interview process. So in order to prepare my students for actually screening interviews and then ultimately campus interviews, and she works with them by giving them a set of questions that they have to write out the answers, and then she screens them on the phone. And these are typical questions that every university would ask. We just keep a list of them. And every student of mine who gets asked any question we haven't heard before tells us what it is, and we write it down. So we have a running list. It's quite long at this point, but they write down their answers, they practice them, and then they do a phone screen with my wife, Gail, Dr. Gail Prybutok. They also sometimes do a Zoom screen. And then before they go to campus, we have them practice with our research group. Our research group meets every Friday afternoon. And during those Friday afternoons, the students practice their proposals. They practice their interview presentation when they go out for a campus interview. At some universities, they do a teaching presentation. At others, a research presentation. And at many, they're asked to do both. They're asked to actually enter a classroom and teach a subject in that classroom to the students there, as well as have faculty watch. They're also asked to talk about their research, both their dissertation research and their research agenda. We have them practice those. So at this point, you know, I have an H index of 47, over 200 journal articles, over 10,000 citations. I mention this because I want you to understand that I come to the students with a set of expertise of my own, but it's important to me as their mentor to spend my energy and time developing them to be all they can be. So the table you see here, you can actually see that this is me and my wife next to me, but everyone else around this table, with the exception of one of my colleagues on the far right, is a doctor. Actually, it's actually true that he was my doctoral student. I forgot. Every single person around this student was a doctoral student of mine, including my current colleague on the far right. I funded him on a research project we did for Lockheed Martin back when he was a doctoral student in the early 90s. So we take up 4 tables at this national conference every year. I look forward to seeing them every time. It's a great event in terms of seeing them develop. I went to, for example, last year I went to the conference. One of my former students who was certainly capable, but is immensely more capable now, won the best research paper at the conference. I went to her presentation. I go to presentations of my own students and former students at the conference. I'm quite busy doing that when you consider that I might have 10 current students presenting 1 or more papers, as well as the former students who were there, and that could be over 30 that are there at the time. So I go to their presentations as long as I don't have conflicts, because I'm also on the board for the Decision Sciences Institute and a vice president in the organization for conferences. And and I saw her presentation and I was amazed. I was amazed at how well developed she had become in the few years since graduating, even though she was already as good as I'm describing. So why is that? It's because I've worked hard to make sure my students understand their obligation to continuously develop, to work at developing not just your research and your ability to publish, but your ability to present your research, your obligation to the professional society. These are things, and your obligation to your students. And I say that because I know everybody can't be great at everything, but you can work at getting better at everything. And in an academic career, it's a very long career. And as a result, if you work continuously at improving, you will become extremely good at everything over a long period of time. So I talked a little bit about research, and I want to go back to that a little more in our time right now. And it's important to recognize that some of us are very lucky. You know, we may be doing mathematical modeling. Just last Friday, I had a doctoral student defend his dissertation on Zoom. On my Friday afternoon meeting, which we still have, but we now do it by Zoom, the committee and that student were there, as well as all of my students who were there. It's actually very rewarding to have this cohort of students that are supportive attending these presentations. In any event, he was doing a mathematical model. He was looking at supplier relationships, contractual relationships, and how to model those, with the issue being how much the supplier is going to be responsible for post-sale maintenance. And so we were able to run that simulation, that mathematical model, actually, it wasn't a simulation, whether he was on campus or not. So his dissertation was what we call a 3-essay or 3-journal article model. The first article was a meta-analysis of papers related to the topic across several of the top journals in supply and operations management. The second paper was the mathematical model, and the third paper was an extension of that mathematical model with a variety of different assumptions about the potential failure rate of products. Now, there's a lot of ways that could have been done. He did it with mathematical modeling. Sometimes things can't be modeled mathematically, even if we try. And so we resort to doing a simulation. This is yet another set of skills. In my own dissertation, I tried to do a mathematical model, could not find the solution, wound up creating a simulation. At some point later, I was able to use the results from the simulation and then analyze those using statistical models and gain some insight into a way to approximate the results very closely with a simplified mathematical model. And so I did what was a linear approximation over small regions and shifting the slope of the linearity. And I mention that because, you know, one research method isn't necessarily the only thing you're going to do your whole career. So I did a simulation, I did a mathematical model, and then I started entering the arena of survey research because many of my students didn't have the background to do mathematical modeling or simulation. And within the survey research, we've worked across a variety of different areas, mostly related to service quality, but I do have an example. And I only include this example to make a point to you. And I make a point about COVID and what you're dealing with right now. And so, for example, I mentioned you could be lucky and you could be able to work at home because you could be doing mathematical modeling, or you could be doing simulation, or you could be doing electronic surveys. But what about those of you who don't have that option? For example, you need to go to the laboratory to do your work. Well, right now at the University of North Texas, we're allowing students into the laboratory, but we are requiring a level of social distancing. So it means that there's less people in the lab at one time, and we're scheduling the lab, and the labs are running considerably later than they might have. But ultimately, there's a way. And what do I mean by that? That means if you had to do your research at 11 at night to 4 in the morning, then that's when you do it. Now, it sounds odd to some people who think that they get up in the morning and they work during the day. But when I was doing my simulation, this is a long time ago, computing time was not free. And we were purchasing time at my university. I was at Drexel University. We were purchasing in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So we were purchasing time on a bank of computers from Unicall. And that computing time, especially because the simulation didn't initially work, I kept blowing up the computing capabilities of the bank of computers. For all I know, that bank of computers is probably about as powerful as a microcomputer today. But that said, I was using too small an iteration for the accidents that I was simulating. So too small and too frequent. So I had to increase the time between accidents and the size of accidents so that there were less of them but larger in order to be able to make the simulation work. And it took me a while to figure that out. And I mentioned that nuance so you understand why I'm actually burning real dollars and running out of money. Now, they gave me more money, but I'm realistic about this. You cannot get money forever. And so I was able to get more money, but I found out one thing that helped me a great deal, which is computing time was cheaper between 11 at night and 6 in the morning. So even though I wasn't in a lab during COVID, I was roaming the halls in my building, waiting for my simulation to run so that I could look at the output. And originally I used to have to wait till the next day because it would be a printout, but I moved to the ability to look at it online. I predate even having screen monitors when I was doing this. I was using a Anderson Jacobson printer with a phone coupler. But that said, the point is I would do this at 11 at night till literally the 4 in the morning I'm talking about, because that was when the computing time was the least expensive and I could look at the results and rerun my simulation. And once I had it running, I still had hundreds of these to run under a variety of scenarios. All right, so back to the survey research. I mentioned that a lot of my students do electronic surveys, but not all of them, especially those who work with my wife in healthcare. They want to interview the elderly. So they could sit around and say, well, I can't do my research. In fact, one of them tried that about a month ago. And the answer my wife gave him is the same as I would have said. Her answer was, of course you can do it. You just can't get in front of them. So that means you're going to have to go to the facility where they are, and you're going to have to set up a computer, and they're going to be able to sit down at the computer and do a Zoom interview. Or if they can't do that, you can phone them. So you can do an interview on phone, you can do an interview on Zoom, and you can also, for those who are capable, create electronic surveys they're able to fill out. I want to make it clear that you're going to find obstacles, and you're going to see these obstacles in everything you do. And the job of a mentor, to a large extent, and that was my point about what my wife told her students and what I've done with my own students, is to help you overcome those obstacles. You might even think, okay, the student I had defend last Friday, and by the way, he did a stellar job. And the other faculty were impressed. But the point I'm making is he actually had a period of time during this uncertainty where he was having trouble working. Now, it seems a little odd because he's perfectly safe. He's working in his house doing mathematical work that you could do in any location. And yet what was happening around him was upsetting emotionally. And it is for almost everyone. So of course, you know, one thing you could do is empathize, but I don't think that's as helpful as helping him overcome that obstacle. So the way I did that was I said, okay, I understand it's unsettling, but what I want you to do is get up every day and brush your teeth and sit down before you do anything else and work for 20 minutes and tell me what you did the next day. So I did that, and he managed to get a little bit done. Got him to the point where he could do a page a day, 2 pages a day, 3 pages a day, and then he was back to working. He had managed to overcome his need to deal with this anxiety, and as a result, he became productive again. All right, so I just want to give a quick example of survey work so that you understand it's no less rigorous. You know, I've been in labs. I ran a biochem lab when I was in my master's program, human physiology lab. I did those things as part of my funding, but I've also, as you understand, done mathematical modeling. I've done simulation, and I've done survey work, and including some qualitative work. I've done those things because they're part of these larger projects we do, but I'm also doing them because I have students who come to me with different skills. And if they don't have the mathematical background to do the math modeling or the simulation, there's other things. So I want you to understand there's no easy path. Not one of these is easier or faster. It really is a function of the skill set of the person there. And the more skills you develop, the better off you are. So we were looking at consumer behavior intention with adopting healthcare technology. Specifically, we were interested in gene repair technology. We know the technology is available. It's just being developed. It will eventually become more commonplace, where it's actually available as an option to parents who might have a child that would be born with a deadly genetic mutation, and they could potentially correct that. So the question is, would they be willing to do that? Some people would and others wouldn't. And there'd be many reasons for them to make those kinds of decisions, and we want to understand that better. So we talk, for example, would you choose to have a child that had spinal muscular atrophy? And or would you choose to repair that? And we give them examples. We talk about how gene repair is done. Now, what is this? Talk about. What we do is we create a survey where we introduce this concept and we tell them what gene repair is and what kinds of things it can do. Now, why did we do this? We did this because the undergraduates at our university are of an age that they're likely to have children in the near future, because most of our undergraduates are between, let's say, 18 and 29 years old, with the vast majority being in their early 20s. And they're likely to have children at some point in the future when this technology becomes more commonplace. And the question is, would they consider it? So we have to educate them about it, and we have to see whether or not they would think about it. This is different than trying, and you might say, why this group again? But this is different in surveying people now. And the reason it's different is the technology is relatively new, it's just being developed, and isn't yet as commonplace, but will become more commonplace as it evolves. And we want to know, a decade from now, will people be receptive to using it? So like anything else, you have to look at other literature. It's not just who has studied gene technology, but who has studied technology acceptance, biotechnology acceptance in different applications, and then our ability to take the kinds of constructs and items that they use to measure those constructs, questions are what items are, questions they use to measure those constructs, transfer it to the context or the type of question related to gene technology, and ask those questions. So the first thing we have to do is go through the theory to find a model that we believe is relevant to what we're doing. So this is one model, it's UTalk 2. I just want you to see it. And I want you to understand, and I'm talking about survey work, and I apologize for those of you who might have been at the conference last year because I did talk about this a little, but I think it has value here again relative to what we're talking about, which is finding a mentor. And I want to talk about the process of doing this research and how it evolved and what the student had to deal with. All right, so when we look at each of these little boxes, they're called constructs or dimensions, depending on whether they're a multi-dimensional construct. but they're constructs in this case. And each one is unidimensional with a single dimension. And each one has multiple questions that have been documented from the literature that measures it. But it measures it in a different context than gene repair. So we have to take these items and we have to rework them to fit what we're after. And so what we did was looked at expectancy, and we looked at Venkatesh's 03 model, and it was used in various contexts since then, in, for example, mobile banking. And then we're looking at using it in gene repair technology. We look at what other people have already done in this area, but no one yet has done a survey related to what we're after here. We also look at the construct of social influence. Again, these are the constructs that were in the model, and each construct has to be documented in the literature as to how it's measured, why it's related in the manner it is to the other constructs, and you have to be able to explain that both in terms of a rationale as well as anchoring it as best you can within the literature, and that's what we're doing here. And so when all is said and done, we borrowed constructs from a variety of other models. We didn't even use Utah 2 exactly because it wasn't relevant to gene repair technology. At least all parts of it weren't relevant because it was originally developed for MIS application, information systems application, and users of that type of technology. So what we did was borrow some of the constructs, utilize based on the theory and the rationale for transferring those constructs to gene repair, along with, as we pointed out, social influence and facilitating conditions, and create a new model that is unique to what we're doing. Now, the other thing we're doing is we're looking at trust in technology, and we're learning something about it because we're showing it not as directly related to behavioral intention, but also mediated in its relationship, meaning trust in technology is connected to perceived risk to behavioral intention, trust in technology to performance expectancy to behavioral intention. Now, we surveyed a group of doctoral students initially because they have all of the group you saw has some level of expertise in survey, even when they do mathematical modeling or they do simulation. They've seen other students present, they've heard lectures like this. And so they're able to read someone's survey and say, these questions appear appropriate, they relate well, or there's errors that I see in the questions. So we essentially proof each other's work. It's the same reason I have people present their mathematical models and their simulations to the group. We're helping each other. So again, the mentorship is not simply that a faculty member is mentoring the student, but the other doctoral students are working collectively to help each other. In a sense, they're a mentor group or support group for each other, both emotionally as well as intellectually. Then, after that group had proofed the survey and any changes that were needed were made, we took it to the Institutional Review Board for approval. We gave it to undergrads, got 300 responses. We talked about the number of questions. I'm going to move through this very quickly. I just want you to understand there's a variety of different things. You do factor analysis, you look at the items loading cleanly. They have to, cleanly means if you look at these bolded numbers, that they loaded on the construct you intended and the cross loadings are low on the other constructs. And eventually we get a resulting model. Now, if you look at this model, it's actually pretty interesting because we have an R-square, if you understand regression models, we have an R-square of 51%, and the behavioral model, that's very high. That's a very good result. We also, and I want you to look at this, notice that trust in technology is not statistically significant in its relationship to behavioral intention directly. HA5, this line, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this line is not statistically significant. However, that doesn't mean trust is not significant. It absolutely is, because it is significant in its relationship to performance expectancy. It is significant in its relationship to perceived risk. And those are significant in their relationship to behavioral intention. So what you see is that trust is fully mediated by perceived risk and performance expectancy in this biotechnology application. Now, the importance of this, the student and I had to talk about this for a while, and this is where I want to go with this, is you might think trust would relate to intention directly. And it might in something like an information systems application. But this is more complex. This is human life you're dealing with. And as a result, they're willing to have trust under certain conditions, which are the risk we're taking on and what are the benefits. And that's what we mean by performance versus risk. It's a risk-benefit trade that is more critical when you deal with health and wellness than it is in some other applications. So this student has actually contributed not just a new model, but a better understanding of trust as it applies to biotechnology. And it means that it will potentially influence how practitioners explain biotechnology, explain health applications to their patients. It could, if you think it through, how you explain to an individual what something will do for them in terms of their health benefit, it becomes critical to also balance that against what are the risks and making sure they understand those risks are small compared to the likely benefit they will get. So doing a survey for the sake of doing a survey is not what this is about. It is about moving science forward, publishing it in a respectable journal, and ultimately having someone translate this basic research to applied science so that practitioners change the way they communicate with patients as a result of this understanding. Now, some may do this already, but they may do it intuitively rather than because there's scientific evidence to support it. All right, so I talked a little about the theoretical contribution of developing a model and publishing it, and I talked about the practical contribution. And I wanted you to understand that this, by putting this in the literature and developing and contributing to science, you're contributing in all cases. It's not just this example. This is just an example I'm giving you to make you understand that all science, all engineering, all humanities and social science research ultimately translates to better lives for individuals. I work in a college of business, and yet people's lives today are immensely better because of improvements that have been made in businesses. Improvements like, for example, logistics, the improvement in the supply chain, the ability to deliver goods and services internationally becomes cost reduction for people. Goods and services are less costly. Better goods and services are available. More people can afford them. They lead better lives as a result. I've been around long enough to remember the way people didn't have bad lives, but in the 50s, they didn't have the quality on average of life they have today. And this is going to continue to happen because of the basic contribution, of moving science forward that we've all made. And I think a mentor needs to make their students understand that that's what they're doing, because it's easy for someone to think, well, I don't like research. But in reality, you're not doing research for the sake of doing the research. You're doing it because you're contributing, and it's an important contribution. All right, so I want to move on past this model. I know, and I want to get through this because it's less critical of what we're doing. It was a second example. And I want to talk a little more about research so that you understand it. And again, this is what a mentor helps you understand. that you're not just working in the lab, you're not just doing a mathematical model, you're not just doing a simulation, you're not just doing a survey, you're not just writing a paper, writing a book if you're in history, but you're actually moving understanding forward. That's what I mean by moving science forward, by publishing articles, by obtaining funding that allows you to do your work, by attending conferences and disseminating this information to your peers and colleagues, as well as learning from them, and that you're also engaging in college and university projects. Now, I talked a little about teaching in the beginning. I want to go back to it. And I want to go back to it because I want you to understand that the person you work with for research could assist you in teaching, could assist you in understanding how you fit into industry or academia. But it's not always true that one person does all of that. You know, one person may do some of it or all of it at a different level, but you can learn from other faculty. That's why we have a committee on a dissertation. That's why you have other faculty that you may work with in the department when you teach a course. It may be that the person who's taught it before is willing to assist you. So I want you to, when you're talk to as many people as you can about the type of position you're seeking. Are you looking for a faculty position? Are you looking for an industry position? Do you understand those positions? Do you understand how to get those positions? And my point to you early was that my students are competitive because they have publications, because they have a stream of research, because they can discuss how they're going to complete. I also believe that having worked on a grant, even in a non-grant based discipline, so in business, grants are less critical than they are in engineering. But having worked on even in my wife's area in health, they're important, but they're less important than they are in some of the hard science and engineering. Because she deals in health communication, and you can conduct some of that research without grants. But having worked on a grant gives all of our doctoral students a competitive advantage. So we don't simply pay them to do the work on the grant. We have them work with us on proposing grants, on developing the next grant, so they understand the mechanics of applying, as well as how the projects are funded and their share of that project when they work on it. Again, you're not obligated to engage in service, but it's important to kind of talk to faculty about what they're doing so you understand what they're doing in terms of curriculum development, leadership of clubs, organizations, student organizations. In my own department, information technology and decision sciences, we have the Computer Information Science Organization for the students, and Informs. The Institute for Operations Research and Management Science has a student branch as well. And both of those are run by faculty who then work with the students who elect officers. There's also other organizations that faculty are involved with, as well as mentoring students in developing their plan of study for their master's and doctoral degrees. So talking to them about courses, as well as teaching their own class and dealing with their students who are potentially having difficulty in the class, so that they have to have office hours for them. So it's important to understand your role as a citizen to an obligation to your colleagues. I'm not suggesting you do an enormous amount of service as a student. I'm not suggesting a junior faculty member do an enormous amount of service. They need to put their time into their research and their teaching, but I'm suggesting that it's important you understand what service is, and that you not shirk responsibility in doing it to the point that other people resent the fact that you're not contributing fairly. We have different levels of expectation for different levels of faculty. Untenured faculty, we tend to have lower levels of service expectation because we understand they have to dedicate more time to developing their research agenda, obtaining grants, publishing papers. They're teaching new courses typically. As they get more established, the level of service tends to increase. It still has to be managed. You can't do all service or all teaching or all research. You need to balance these. If you're in industry, it's not much different. So I talk about getting ready to enter the job market, and you really need a portfolio. It's not just a resume. You need to have what we call a curriculum vitae for faculty jobs, or a long resume for industry jobs, longer than a short resume that an undergrad might have. You need a draft cover letter. You typically need a statement about your research. You need to prepare a teaching philosophy and teaching portfolio if you're seeking a faculty job. For industry positions, I still would suggest you talk about your presentation style so that they understand that you're able to present to a group. Being complete is difficult if you just wait until somebody says, well, we want you to prepare these things and you're going to interview in 2 weeks. So I want you to start thinking about these as you're finishing your dissertation so that you understand what you need to do to enter the job market. In fact, I want you to think about them almost the year before, so that by the time my students, again, students interview fall of 20 to get jobs fall of 21. Now, all these materials, the publications, everything needs to be ready before fall of 20 in order to be competitive on the job market that you're interviewing for, because the screening interviews at the conferences take place in fall, and the campus visits take place typically between December and March. This year, it's been a little odder. Some schools got out early, others delayed bringing people to campus, started with Zoom interviews. I had a student do an 8-hour Zoom interview. Others, schools simply delayed their hiring, and now they're in the market hiring for fall of 20. Very difficult for them to do because it's hard for international students, for example, to get cleared in time. But there are schools doing it because they had faculty that weren't as organized and get as other schools were during this period when they were closed. We weren't closed in reality. That's a misnomer. We simply were no longer conducting classes in person. We were doing them remotely. We were teaching online as we always do. The online classes stayed online, but we took the face-to-face classes to remote, and the instructors gave Zoom presentations. Well, we could just as easily have had committee meetings, interviewed, reviewed resumes, talked about them amongst faculty committees, and then interviewed through Zoom and hired. And in fact, that's what happened with the student I was talking about. You also need to think about where you're going to get your letters of recommendation. You can't simply ask people if they'll write you a letter. You need to ask if they'll write you a strong letter, and you need to know that these letters are good. They need to be substantial. You can't write a paragraph saying this is a good person who finished their dissertation and got good grades. It really needs to be somewhat extensive about your relationship with the student and what you understand they're able to do in terms of their research, teaching, and service. More schools are asked, and that's for faculty positions, and it needs to be as complete for industry with a slightly different orientation. All right, so I talked a little about you need a mentor that's going to help you do all these things. And when I say mentor, it could be several mentors. It could be one person helps you learn with your research, and someone else helps you fix your writing. Someone else teaches you to interview. And you may get a lot of that from one person, but you may also supplement with others. But ultimately, you still have to work. You have to practice. You have to practice, for example, by writing down the kinds of things you're going to say. You have to practice by doing your presentation, like the one I'm doing now, several times before you do it in front of your group. You also need to practice on Zoom or Skype or WebEx. You need to practice in case you're asked to do an interview or a presentation using that media so you understand how to do it. And ultimately, you need to practice for the campus visit. You need to practice the research presentation, the teaching presentation, and the screening. And it's not simple. A typical campus interview is over a couple of days. They fly you in the day before, they take you to dinner. That dinner is an interview, and it will last multiple hours. I tell my students it lasts 2 hours. One of them was laughing, said 3. So, because they're going to ask you things during that dinner. They want to get to know you. They want to know who you are to some extent as a person. They want to know who you are as a professional, that you can handle yourself. Then the next day starts. Someone takes you to breakfast. They take you to campus. Industry is the same. I remember I went to industry. Same process, basically. Then it's like somebody takes you to meet the first person, and occasionally you're taken around campus or the industry complex by one person, or they have it set up so that the last person who sees you takes you to the next person. Either way, they escort you from interview to interview, with interviews between a half an hour to an hour, and you see over 8 people in a single day individually, as well as having to do a presentation. And I told you I went to industry. I had to do a research presentation to the Research Institute in order to get that position in the Research Institute. And that was the standard that we followed. So you will have to practice these. You have to do your research about the company or school. Why? You can't just say, well, I like the location. I like the environment. You should have looked up people who worked there. You should have found out things about their research, found out things about the company, about the school. What kinds of programs do they have? What kinds of courses? How comfortable are you with those programs and courses? Which ones could you feel comfortable saying you could teach? What kind of research can you bring to this company? And ultimately, you want to tell them why it's a good match for you and them. And one more thing. I don't tell my students to apply to 20 jobs. I tell them to apply to every single opening they find through our academic association, Decision Sciences Institute and Informs, or AMSIS and ISIS if they're more on the IT side. I tell them to look in higher ed jobs on the Chronicle and Indeed, these are online, and apply to every job. My typical student applies to 150 or more jobs in academia, of which they're likely to get about 20 to 30 screening interviews with 4 or more campus invitations. Frequently, they'll get to visit about 3 campuses before they have an offer in writing, and they have to make a decision about the others. Occasionally, they can get 4 in. It's just a matter of timing. That's why some schools interview early. They're going to get their first candidates by interviewing early because they're giving them less time to think about it because they're better organized. But there's a different strategy for the employer than there is for the applicant. The point is you need to understand what they're doing and you need to know how to respond to it. So I want to open it up to the group to have questions. I want to see if I can get back to I'll stop screen share so that I can see the chat. Okay, so one person asked me in the chat, what's the prospects of getting admission as a postdoc right now? Well, the biggest problem we have, in Texas right now, you may not know. I watch CNN every morning and I can't believe what I'm seeing, but Texas is up over 50% in COVID cases. And some states are saying that they're some states are saying that they're going to quarantine people who fly in from Texas to those states. So I want you to understand that there's no guarantees. However, the key to getting to Texas is to find a university that might have a postdoc, and for you to have a work visa that allows you to do that job. The biggest problem we have right now is getting people to Texas. We have an enormous number of students right now that have been accepted to our graduate programs from India, both doctoral programs as well as master's program. A good friend of mine is the Dean of the College of Information, Kinshik. Dr. Kinshik has got 500 or more students from India coming to join his data science masters. We have also in the grad school, we have a master's in advanced data analytics. We have a large number of students. I don't know if they can get visas right now. I hope they can, but I know that that process has been slowed down, and we know that it's problematic. Now, for those students who are already here studying, it's much easier. So it just depends on the individual situation and when you're looking for. Can't give you any more specifics. What I can say is my advice remains: apply, and apply to as many things, as many as you can, and take a look. It looks like we have about 10 to 15 more minutes if other people have questions, and I can try to read the chat. I'm flipping back and forth because I keep going out of.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. Thank you very much for your wonderful talk.
So somebody asked me an effective way.
I'm sure that takeaway from.
You take over, Shalja, or Dr. Mamta?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir, for a session full of information and knowledge. Stay with us as lifelong learning in our educational and professional development. I request Dr. Mamta to please take our question session. Dr. Mamta, please.
Thank you, Shalja ma'am. Thank you, Shalja ma'am. Someone asked a question that how we can apply for PhD in education subject. Professor Victor?
I'll be happy to answer that. So first of all, I want to address two things. We have a College of Education here at the University of North Texas. It's a very large college. So do many other universities. The first thing you have to do, there's PhD. So the first thing you have to do is find a university that has a program that interests you, find faculty that are working in an area that you're interested in, and then apply to that program, hopefully several. My general advice is apply to between 5 and 10. Optimal is about 7 or 8 different universities, and pick several that are aspirational, very high-end educational colleges in prestigious, with prestigious departments and faculty. Others that are more right in the middle, and a couple of those that you think you're certain to get into, safety schools we call those. But the point is, about 7 schools would be ideal, maybe 8, and pick schools based on the kind of degree you want. It's not just a PhD in education, but what do you want to do with it? Do you want to do curriculum instruction? And this is just rhetorical. I want you to understand. You have to look carefully. Do you want to do ed research, which is basically psychometrics? We call it ed psych now. Do you want to do counseling, educational counseling? You have to pick the departments and the faculty and see in those programs, and you have to then explore their research, and then you have to write why you want to be working with those faculty. and you have to apply to about 7 schools, and each one has to be done very thoughtfully. Of course, you have to take the GREs, because I wish I could say all schools are waiving the GRE. We did for the masters, but for PhDs, faculty are very reluctant. And so that is the process for almost any PhD, whether it be education or not. I also want to talk about, very briefly, lifelong learning. Somebody mentioned that. And I want you to understand that I don't know how to do everything because the world keeps changing. The very things I did in the early 80s would never work today. And in fact, I had to keep changing. And just recently we submitted a survey work, and now we have to revise the way we do our analysis. There's a whole argument about whether you can use partial least squares. So now we have to do it we're using neural nets, and we're using regression models to support the partial least square. In addition, people are less interested in static surveys than they are either longitudinal or experiment or cross-sectional surveys. Again, these are just nuances that the science keeps getting more sophisticated, and it's important to keep changing with it. So I hope I answered the question. We still have a few more minutes if somebody has another question.
Sir, someone wants to know that why every research is not an innovation.
I couldn't hear what you said. Why something research is what?
Yes, sir. Should I repeat?
What was the question? Repeat it.
Why every research is not an innovation?
Well, I do think every research is an innovation. I don't know why somebody would say, why isn't every research an innovation? Moving science forward is innovating. That's why I use that term. I use that term because most people in the audience, you're at a University of Science and Technology, and so a very large percentage of you may be in either engineering or science, but in reality, all innovation is extending science forward. Those are interchangeable conceptually to me.
Thank you, sir. Someone wants to know how can we seek for grant-based project leading to postdoc assignment?
So one of the things you need to do to get a postdoc is look for someone who's doing research in an area that is aligned with what you know, but different, so that you will develop further, and reach out and talk to that person directly, contact them. And then if you're able to obtain, and typically for a postdoc, that person has to have grant funding in hand. And so it would behoove you to talk, hopefully, to your own advisor about who might be a good postdoctoral mentor, because that can often open that opportunity to you. And then contact that person and talk about the kinds of things they might like to do and how you can help.
Thank you, sir. Sir, please explain, without commercialization, what is the significance of research?
So I'm kind of passionate about research because I believe it improves the lives of people. So when we talked about it, and I talked about the trust model, and I talked about how doctors would change the way they talk to patients, that's just one area of application. Commercialization is critical to all things that we create. So for example, we have a friend of mine who's a chemist, and he's created what we call a drug sniffing car. So instead of a dog, this is a little automatic guided vehicle. It's a car that can go around, and it can actually take odors and examine them, and it can determine whether or not those odors represent illegal drugs. And so now that car is being commercialized, as you can imagine, for use in airports, by police departments, by drug enforcement, but they're still, it's still in the early developmental stage. It's being used limitedly. The point is, technology has to be created through science, and then eventually it has to be manufacturable at a cost-effective price. So sometimes we talk about design for manufacturability. Each part of this requires scientific innovation. You have to have the basic invention. You have to translate the invention to something that's workable. You have to determine how to take that workable item and make it manufacturable. You have to be able to do it for a competitive price. An example that I could give you that's timely right now is we will likely get a COVID vaccine, just like we have a flu vaccine. I say likely, I think we will be able to get one. But it doesn't do us any good if the vaccine costs $100,000 a shot. So someone has to figure out how to manufacture it like the flu vaccine, where people can pay $15 in the US to get that shot so that we can vaccinate large numbers of people and have immunity so that it doesn't continue to spread. So this is true of every single innovation. They have to be translated and operationalized, and then they have to be able to be delivered in a cost-effective manner.
Thank you, sir. Sir, is there any way to publish a paper with professor or students who are doing research in foreign universities?
Absolutely. You have to reach out to people who are doing work that interests you, and you have to see if you can work long distance. So, for example, I actually had a doctoral student many years ago now who finished his entire dissertation, and then we published 6 more papers while he wasn't on campus. He did 3 years on campus because the United States government sent him to the university to get a PhD. And then he left campus and went back to work for the US government, and he worked in government libraries. And we were able to complete his dissertation and publish 6 papers. It wouldn't have mattered. He happened to be in Virginia, but it wouldn't matter if he was in Virginia or if he was in Africa. We could have worked the same way, because what we did was worked electronically. And rarely did we even talk, which we can do through Zoom and WhatsApp today for free. But rarely did we ever, but the time difference makes it important that you be able to work long distance electronically.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your valuable information. Now I invite Shelja ma'am to please hand over the stage.
Before you do that, I want to thank all of you again for the opportunity to talk to this large group, 77 participants. I want to talk to every one of the students for 1 second. I just want to wish you every success in life. Please take this advice and understand how to translate it to work for you, both the doctoral students and the postdocs. I hope this was helpful. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prybutok, for quenching our queries. I would request Dr. Kumar, Worthy Registrar, JC Bose University of Science and Technology, YMCA Faridabad, to deliver vote of thanks.
Thank you, madam. I'm audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Yes, sir, you are
Okay.
audible.
Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege for me to propose vote of thanks on the occasion of webinar on developing as a doctoral student or postdoc by seeking mentorship in our changing education landscape, organized by Research and Development Faculty in association with International Affairs Cell of the JC Bose University of Science and Technology. I extend my heartfelt thanks to our distinguished guest or speaker, Dr. Victor Prybutok, Dean, University of North Texas, for sparing your valuable time and enlightening our research student on the importance of mentorship. You are a very good speaker or guide. We have listened to you in January also in our international conference in which you have been there in our conference. So once again, I thank you, Professor Prybutok. I would also like to Professor Kumar ji, who is always a source of inspiration for us. Your guidance is always needed by us. I congratulate all participants for being a part. Faculty of Professor Rajesh Ahuja ji, Dean Faculty of Research and Development, and International Affairs Cell of the University for their teamwork in organizing this webinar. Last but not the least, I thank all who directly or indirectly were part of this webinar. Jai Hind. Thank you once again, Professor Prybutok, to be with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your thank you now. I also express my sincere gratitude to all the participants for taking out their valuable time to be a part of this webinar and making it a successful and memorable session. Your live interaction during the webinar added values for all of us. Wish you all stay healthy and safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Victor. Thank you. Thank you once again. I think Dr. Shalja, you can end the meeting now.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir. You can end it.